If you are a lover or have a special interest in African stories, then this interview is just for you, as we'll be discussing the current state of African literature and storytelling. Now, this comes ahead of Africa Day, which is celebrated every year on the 25th of May. And to help us unpack this topic, we joined in studio this morning by an African storyteller, and she's Africa's acclaimed writer, Zukiswa Wanner. Very good morning to you, Zukiswa.
Good morning to you. How are you doing?
Great. How are you? Good to have you in studio.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, as an African storyteller yourself, and with May being Africa Month, do you think enough has been done to tell the African story through literature? I
think that more can always be done. There is, but there's been a lot of stories. Certainly, since my first book came out in 2006 up until now, you can actually go on and be able to read South African literature and African literature and just read that for the next 5 years, stuff that has been produced since 2006 up until today. And you would go for 5 years without reading anything else. So there are a lot of stories. The thing that we need to work on is people having access to those stories, because a lot of bookshops on the continent still have a bias towards putting the Western books on shelf spaces in favor of African literature.
Yeah. Now, looking at countries such as Nigeria, who've been successful in penetrating the global market when it comes to literature, and is considered one of the countries who are all continuously getting it right, where is South Africa in terms of the literary landscape or hierarchy?
I think word for word, actually, South Africans are outwriting Nigerians. You won't believe this, but it's true. However, where South Africa is failing is South Africa is not marketing to the rest of the continent. Okay. When a lot of our publishers have books out, the first thing they think about is, after South Africa, how do we get this book to the UK, to Germany, to the US? They don't think about the way the stories that we write resonate with the rest of the continent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're more concerned with the logistical issues rather than the content.
Well, yeah, this is our issue. Our content is really great, and I know that every time, for instance, that I take South African literature to Nigeria, where I sit on the board of Acclaimed Festival, or I take it to Kenya, where I now stay, it's very interesting that a lot of the stories resonate with people, and people love the literature, and they say, how do we not know this writer? How is it that this is not happening? So, yes, we absolutely need to make sure that we understand that South African literature is African literature, and we are in Africa more than anything else.
Yeah. Now, Zukiswa, as an acclaimed writer yourself, and you've explored so many African countries, what's your stance with regards to telling African stories locally and globally?
I think, I was having this conversation yesterday, I think what's so important really is we've got our stories to tell, and sometimes there is the danger of people deciding what constitutes African stories, but I think African stories are vast, just as this continent is vast. Just as we have over 2,000 languages, we've got over 2,000 storylines. Sure. So we should be allowed to be able to, write crime fiction, science fiction, so-called Afrofuturism, and. I think the only limit is what we put on ourselves. Yeah.
And I do understand that you've already started your publishing company, is that correct?
Yes, I have, and I'm very excited about that.
Jeez,
I am not doing anything major this year except for a children's book. Okay. So I'm doing a children's book with stories from all over the continent. Okay. It was curated by a friend of mine. It was a competition, and I am hoping to get it translated into Xhosa and Shona, for instance. So I'm doing the East and Southern African distribution, but the West African distribution will be done by another very respected friend of mine who is also a writer, but now also a publisher, Lola Shoneyin. I'm thinking of pitching to her that she should also get it translated into Yoruba and Hausa, so that as many African children can have access to it as possible.
And I'm curious to know why in particular children's literature?
Because, our children need stories. I remember when I was, I'm a mom, and when my child was really young, I was always hunting for stories that are centered on him, that are about his story, and it was so difficult to find them. And so when Maimuna, who curated this program, did it, I thought, this is something I'd like to do. But I'm also a children's writer myself. So, you know, I want to have as many stories for children as possible. I want them to be as vast as the fairy tales that children in the West are veiled to. And I want them to be able, children to be able to see themselves in literature as I want them to be able to see themselves on film, for instance.
So do you think starting your own publishing company is the answer to promoting African writers and authors?
I certainly hope so. And I hope so primarily because I have access to the East African market and the Southern African market. So I know quite a few people writing associations and stuff in the different countries. So I'm hoping with that access, I will be able to do something that I've always wanted South African publishers to do, even when I was a writer under their stables.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Zukiswa, keep on writing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time. That was novelist Zukiswa Wanner helping us unpack the current state of African literature and storytelling. And this comes ahead of the celebrations of Africa Day on the 25th of May. This is Morning Live. Let's go for a break.